As you might already guessed, this will be a video about how I built a trailer for my plane. I thought of showing you guys first the final result and then proceeding to explain in how I got there. But first I have to warn you that you get the right expectations from the beginning. I was not sure how everything will end up, and my main goal was to get the job done, not to make the video. So I did took some shots here and there and hopefully have all the essential steps covered, but for some parts I just took pictures, so don't expect the top quality content here. In this first part I will cover how I got to a point where I had a decent chassis to build upon further. So if you are more interested in the actual building process, you can skip to part 2 directly. Okay, and now when we covered the disclaimers, let's talk about the mission. We start with the mission about the plane, not the trailer. I wanted a 2-seat, reasonably fast and relatively cheap plane. I'm not a kind of a Glasair turbocharged full Garmin panel type of guy. I just wanted more like a Volkswagen air-cooled with some steam gauges and a tablet. And the hangar availability is not so great here in Stockholm where I live, so preferably it would be a plane with easily foldable wings to take less space in a hangar, or that I could even store the plane in the trailer. And with that mission in mind, almost the only option you have is Sunaway 2. I was actually considering a scratch build, but was preferring to take over some project to save some time. And find a good Sunaway in US is no big deal, but here in Sweden they are quite rare. But finally I found one in Finland. It was a nice bird that unfortunately had an engine failure in flight, so the landing was rough, but the plane was not that much damaged. The wings are only lightly damaged. The fuselage requires more work. Anyway, 1,400 kilometers of snow-covered roads of Finland later, it finally arrived home. The plane barely fit inside my garage, and only after the propeller and the vertical stabilizer were removed. So it became clear that there is no way I can both store the plane and work on it at the same time. So especially working on wings would require the fuselage to be moved out. So since I wanted to build a trailer anyway, I decided to start building a trailer which I can use for storing parts of the plane and later for transporting to and from the airfield, like for doing major maintenance and possibly for storing it at the airfield. I wanted to start from a chassis of a camper or a boat trailer, and for rebuilding a registered camper or trailer, the only rules here in Sweden are that you're not allowed to remove any element of the chassis, but you can add more elements to make it stronger. Also, you're not allowed to change the distance between the hitch bow and the axle. That means that if you take a chassis from a too short camper, you cannot move the axle backwards, and then the bow pressure will be too low. It is ideally that the center of gravity of the rebuilt trailer ends up somewhat in front of the axle, both when the trailer is empty and when it is loaded, and that the bow pressure is around 60 to 100 kilos, but not high what your car is designed for. So for my drawings I had to start with a camper that was around 6.5 meters long. You can find chassis from old campers here in Sweden. These are some of the ones I found now, and the prices are quite okay. It's from around 50 euros to 300 euros for a chassis. But some of those ones are not registered anymore, and in that case it would be impossible to register the trailer when it's built. And another problem is when buying a chassis is that you cannot just hook it up to a car and drive home, since they don't have any lights or number plates. So some kind of transport and loading, unloading is required, which makes it even more complicated. Another option was to buy an old camper and just remove the cabin myself. And the advantage is that at least you can transport it home easily if the brakes and lights are working properly. And even if it didn't pass the road inspection recently, it's still allowed to drive one to the inspection workshop, and with some careful planning you can plan the route so it passes quite close to where you live, and just change your mind in the last minute. Here it's also important that it's still registered, otherwise you cannot drive it and it will be hard to register it back. It's possible to find one for free, but sometimes it's not in good enough condition for driving. Sometimes it's far away, and sometimes it's just not the right length. After some time, I finally found the one. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Sevco 542 from 1979. It has two axles, 6.8 meters of total length, and a gross weight of 1,400 kilos. The guy was moving out from a house to an apartment and had to get rid of it fast. Someone broke in to it a few years ago and left the door opened. Then it was raining a lot, and part of the floor got damaged. Then the guy decided to renovate it totally, started to repair the floor, but never got it finished. So I got it for free. Came a few days later, installed some new lamps, fixed one of the walls to the new floor by some screws, and transported back home. Luckily it was only just like a 15 minutes drive through small roads, and everything went fine with the transport. Removing the cabin was quite straightforward. First was to remove which was left inside, then remove the aluminium profiles from the edges, then pry the aluminium sheets which were attached by staples to the wooden structure, and then peel off the aluminum sheet from the roof. I found a lot of rotten wood, so it was definitely not only the piece of the floor which was damaged. Then I fixed the walls together so they don't collapse when I remove the roof, and cut pieces of the roof piece by piece. After the roof was removed, it was just to proceed the same way with the walls. Of course, I tried to clean everything after each step, trying to avoid the styrofoam pieces flying around. The floor I cut to several pieces and partly threw away, but left few pieces which I could stand on when working further. The metal parts I drove to recycling and got like 70 euros for it. The wood and styrofoam was just left to a nearby recycling station. As you can see, the chassis was in quite good shape. The zinc coating is still good, no rust, but the axle assembly was rusty. As you can see, it consists of two axles connected together. The problem that I discovered was that axles were stuck, and the arms could not be moved even by a little. Here you can actually see I move it, but that is only because I removed the coupling between the axles. When it was still in place, I could not move it even by a millimeter. It turned out it was a fairly common problem for all trailers, and I read that they check it at road inspection, and if it's stuck, nearly the only solution is to replace them. New axles are quite expensive. Here are some I found. So around 900 euros for one axle, 2100 for a package of two, plus all the accessories for the brakes. The cheapest is around 650 euros. These axles are designed to be mounted from below, and if I mounted it below the chassis, it would raise the chassis by about 20 centimeters, which is way too much. So I would have to make a hole in the chassis, then weld a mounting plate to which I could bolt the chassis. Then the hole would probably need to be welded back with some metal plate. I read that it is possible to repair an axle depending on its type. There are leaf spring suspensions. Then probably the most common is the rubber torsion axle, which usually consists of two half axles which are surrounded by four rubber cords which compress when force is applied. Another type is when the rubber is casted around the axle. Some older axles have a metal torsion rod inside, which goes all the way from one end to the other and is fixed in the middle. Here are some pictures of the metal torsion bar axle being disassembled. Here is the same, just half axles, the rubber torsion one and the metal torsion one. My axle looked a bit like metal torsion bar one, since it was round, but it had no ways to remove the arms. So anyway, I thought it had to be a rubber torsion one. I removed the axle assembly from the chassis and tried to remove the arms. I saw a few videos how it can be done. In this one they are using a professional setup, but I saw even few videos where a more DIY tools were used. I cannot find these videos now. I ended up using a hydraulic jack and a mechanic jack with the two pipes pushing out the side plate. It wasn't easy, but after some heating it started to move. Then I was switching between the sides and pushed out the side plate with two half axles. So it was indeed a rubber torsion axles with an unusual design where each half axle had two rubber bushings which do the magic, or at least did when it was new. I could push out the half axle from the plate, squeezing it out using some threaded rods. I tried also removing the other two half axles by different methods, but it didn't work. But it played a minor role since it was impossible to find spare parts for those axles. So after all this work, I had a chassis that could not be used. Maybe finding another chassis would be an easier way, but I didn't want to give up and already had a plan B. I cut out the other two axles with the angle grinder and a manual saw, and prepared for changing the axles to the new ones. I decided to go with axles from Swedish company Sverige Axel, which is literally translated to Swedish axle. From them you actually get like a kit for building an axle, and you need to reuse the arms from your old axle. When the arms are ready, you install it together with the rubber cords and crush plate inside the rectangular pipe. Then you screw in these three bolts from the outside, which compress the rubber cords, and then you can just slide in the metal fork and unscrew the bolts, and you end up with a rubber torsion axle. These profiles, which you see in the drawing, were provided with the axles. Here they are at the photo. I had to grind the old axles from 4 sides so the profiles could slide in. Of course, the position of those grinds were very important because it determines the angle of the arms when everything is assembled. And you want to end up with the same angle as before, and you want the angles to be exactly the same on all 4 wheels. So I had to do a lot of measurements and calculations to make everything right. Then it was just to weld the profiles to the old axles, both through the welding holes and on the edges, grind the welds flat and paint. I didn't take any pictures when I welded the rectangular pipes, but basically I cut holes in the side profiles with the same dimensions, then mounted the side profiles to the chassis, installed the pipes and tack welded them on place. Then removed the axle assembly and welded everything permanently, then painted and installed back. The installation of the arms went quite uneventful, and the angles were spot on. Probably I just had lots of luck. So finally I had a decent chassis to work on further. It took like half a year since I bought the trailer to get to that point. Especially working on the axle took time. The axles were only like 650 euros, so if you don't count the time, then the cost was still quite okay. In the next part, I will cover actually building the trailer, so check that part if you're interested in how it went.